In one of my previous videos, I talked about how the British Empire could have been saved if not for Britain's collapse after the Second World War. Well, it was Winston Churchill who was so eager for Britain to enter the war in the first place. In 2002, the BBC conducted a poll on the 100 greatest Britons of all time, and Churchill was voted number 1, beating the likes of Horatio Nelson, Sir Isaac Newton, William Shakespeare, and Alfred the Great. Now, while he did achieve some truly great things like defeating the Nazis, I cannot think of a more divisive figure in British history than Winston Churchill. Despite coming first on the list, there are some who would argue that Churchill was actually a terrible Prime Minister and an even worse person. From starving Indians and plunging the nation into catastrophic debt to leading the nation and defeating the Nazis. In today's video, we are going to be analysing Winston Churchill, Britain's Marmite Prime Minister. Right, so we're going to structure this video by doing all of the good points first and then going into the bad stuff. Sound fair? Alright, let's do it. Churchill did achieve some truly extraordinary things. As a young politician, Churchill was quite liberal, well, relative to his time. As Chancellor of the Exchequer, he supported the People's Budget in 1909, which introduced radical reforms like the old age pension, unemployment insurance, and progressive taxation. Essentially, Churchill was genuinely concerned about helping working class people. And that's the common theme with Churchill. Despite all the bad stuff, he genuinely seems to care about Britain, its people, and doing what he believed to be the right thing. Churchill wasn't just a politician, he was also a soldier. During the First World War, Churchill volunteered to fight on the front line in the trenches with his men after his political reputation took a major hit with the Gallipoli incident. More on that fiasco in a moment. But think about this, he came from the British elite, raised in Blenheim Palace, and yet he left the safety of a privileged life to command a battalion in the trenches. That takes courage, and he deserves credit for that. Churchill was also a visionary when it came to warfare. He was one of the first to push for the adoption of tanks during the First World War. Initially, he was mocked. Now, this innovation later transformed modern warfare. And let's face it, he was absolutely spot on about tanks and the Nazis. At a time when many people admired, or at least sympathized with Hitler, Churchill saw through it and loudly warned everyone. During the darkest days of World War II, Churchill's speeches, like the infamous "We shall fight on the beaches," weren't just inspiring, they helped to rally Britain at a moment when all seemed lost. It's hard to overstate just how much his defiance and stubbornness mattered in those terrifying times. When Britain was at its darkest hour, Churchill was there to lead us. Also, on a personal level, Churchill was loyal to his wife, Clementine, and he loved her very much. And he was deeply loyal to the monarchy. Now, let's give credit where credit is due. He was a gifted writer. His historical works are genuinely brilliant, especially his series, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples. It is still widely read today. Churchill was many things, but he certainly was not lazy. He took his duties seriously, even if some decisions turned out to be disastrous. All right, now that's the nice things out of the way. Let's discuss the controversies. Because Churchill had plenty of negatives, and frankly, they're significant. First and foremost, Churchill had a massive ego. He fancied himself as a military genius in the mould of his ancestor John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. Growing up surrounded by tapestries depicting the glorious Battle of Blenheim clearly gave him delusions of grandeur. And nowhere was this clearer than Gallipoli. That's right, we're on to Gallipoli. In 1915, Churchill decided to invade the Ottoman Empire through the Dardanelles and had a battle on the peninsula at Gallipoli. It was a disaster. Thousands of British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers died. Gallipoli wasn't just a strategic miscalculation, it was an example of Churchill's recklessness, and it haunted his career for decades. Now, Churchill was also deeply flawed in his views about race. Now, I know what you're thinking, and trust me, I hate all of this woke bullshit as much as you do. But let's be honest, Churchill was genuinely racist. Yes, everyone was racist back then, but even back in the day, Churchill took racism to a whole different level. His attitude towards India was shocking. He referred to Indians as a beastly people with a beastly religion, and he openly dismissed their suffering during the 1943 Bengal Famine, where about 3 million of them died. Now, just to put this into perspective, Hitler killed 6 million Jews. All right, well, look, that's not his fault, is it? I mean, it was a famine. Well, actually, Churchill diverted food away from the starving Indians so that he could stockpile it into Europe. Yeah, that's really bad. Churchill's attitude towards Ireland wasn't any better. His hardline views contributed significantly to hostility that still echoes today. As the Secretary of State for War in 1920, he was responsible for deploying the infamous Black and Tans. The Black and Tans were a British paramilitary force recruited in 1920 to reinforce the Royal Irish Constabulary during the Irish War of Independence. They were made up largely of ex-soldiers from the First World War, and they became infamous for their brutal and often indiscriminate violence against Irish civilians, earning a lasting legacy of fear and controversy in Ireland. Not a great look for someone remembered as a beacon of freedom and democracy. And then there was Churchill's strange obsession with America. Churchill's mother was an American, and this partly explains his deep admiration for the US. Now look, I like Americans as much as the next English person. They're kind of like our cousins in a way. But Churchill's approach to the US was overly deferential. During the Second World War, Churchill was so desperate to get American support that he signed the Lend-Lease Agreement, effectively handing Britain's global economic dominance to the US. By the end of the Second World War, Britain was left crippled by debt, and Churchill's deal-making was partly to blame. It was mostly to blame. He famously said, "No lover ever studied every whim of his mistress as I did those of President Roosevelt." It's not gay, is it? But seriously, Churchill gave away Britain's global dominance to the Americans on a silver platter. So if you're British and you're wondering why the UK went from a global superpower to this, blame Churchill. Another point of contention is that after the Battle of Britain, Churchill could have sued for peace with Germany. Hitler offered Britain peace terms. Churchill refused. Now, morally, I suppose that refusing peace with Nazi Germany is probably the right call, but from a purely practical perspective, continuing the war bankrupted Britain, killed millions, and ended the empire. Was the price worth paying? Because if you've seen Eurovision, most Europeans hate us anyway. Now, militarily, Churchill's strategic decisions in the Second World War were also mixed. The decision to invade through Italy, forgetting about the Alps, was questionable. The Italian campaign became a brutal slog, and the strategic advantages were minimal at best. Churchill was brilliant at inspiring people, but his military strategy left a lot to be desired. He was no Montgomery. Finally, Churchill's personal life wasn't perfect either. The man was a chronic alcoholic. There's no sugarcoating it. He famously drank champagne for breakfast and whiskey throughout the day. And look, being a drunk doesn't automatically make someone a bad person, but it's hard not to think it might have clouded his judgment on occasion. Now, let's briefly mention the middle ground. It's not all black and white. Decisions like sinking the French fleet at Mars el Kebir in 1940 often gets a bad reaction. Churchill ordered this to prevent the French Navy from falling into German hands after the French refused to let the British have their ships. Approximately 1,800 French sailors died or were wounded. Now, was this justified? Yeah, I suppose it was in the grand scheme of things. Still, it's controversial and a lot of people think it was wrong. And it wasn't good. It was necessary, maybe. But yeah, it's definitely a grey area. So, what's the verdict? Was Churchill a bad Prime Minister? Well, it depends. Churchill was incredibly courageous, inspirational, and pivotal in defeating the Nazis. His determination and speeches may have literally saved Britain from defeat. But Churchill was also arrogant, reckless, morally reprehensible at times, and responsible for some serious strategic blunders. His legacy is a mixed bag. Churchill was Britain's Marmite Prime Minister. You either love him or hate him, and I genuinely think that both views have merit. History isn't black and white, especially not Churchill's. So, what did you think? Was Winston Churchill a British hero who saved democracy, or is leaving 3 million people to starve to death just unforgivable, no matter what great accomplishments followed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, and while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.